Chicago's streets lay quiet under a restless October night, the wind cutting through the city with a bitter edge. Rain-slicked pavement gleamed under flickering streetlights, casting shadows that danced in the mist. Lily Morgan, 24 years old, tugged her worn jacket closer as she stepped out of Brew and Bean, the small coffee shop where she worked late shifts as a barista. Her legs ached from hours on her feet, and her breath fogged in the chilly air. In her pocket, a single crumpled dollar bill pressed against her fingers. Her only money until payday. She planned to buy a discounted loaf of bread from the deli down the street, enough to tide her over for a few days. As she crossed the empty intersection, a sound pierced the wind's howl, a hoarse cough, faint but raw, coming from a shadowed alley. Lily paused, her heart quickening. She peered into the darkness and saw a figure slumped against a brick wall, near a dumpster overflowing with trash. A man, maybe in his early 40s, sat with his knees drawn up, his tattered coat barely shielding him from the damp. His face was half hidden by a scruffy beard, but his eyes, green and sharp, caught the faint glow of a streetlight. They carried a weight, a quiet exhaustion that spoke of more than just a cold night. Lily's hand tightened around the dollar in her pocket. She thought of walking on, her apartment a 20-minute trek away, and that bread her only plan for dinner. But the cough came again, weaker, and she remembered her mother's voice, soft and certain, saying kindness was the one thing you could always afford to give. She stepped closer, crouching in front of the man. His hands trembled as she pressed the dollar into his palm. "Stay warm," she said, her voice soft but steady, almost swallowed by the wind. The man looked up, his gaze locking onto hers. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice low and rough like it hadn't been used in days. He held the dollar loosely, as if it weighed more than it should. Lily offered a shy smile, standing to leave. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. Her sneakers splashed in a puddle as she turned, the cold seeping through her soles. But before she could take another step, headlights sliced through the mist. A black SUV roared to a stop at the curb, its tires screeching on the wet asphalt. Two men in crisp suits stepped out, their faces hard and purposeful. "Thomas Hargrove," one shouted, his voice sharp enough to cut through the night. The man, who'd called himself Tom, scrambled to his feet, the dollar slipping from his hand and fluttering to the ground. Panic flashed across his face, his breath coming in short gasps. Lily's pulse surged. She didn't know who Thomas Hargrove was or what these men wanted, but the fear in Tom's eyes was unmistakable. The suited men advanced, their steps deliberate, their hands flexing as if ready to grab him. Lily didn't think. "Come on," she hissed, seizing Tom's arm. His sleeve was damp and cold, but she held tight, pulling him into the alley beside the deli. Their footsteps echoed off the brick walls, splashing through puddles as they ran. The men's shouts followed, angry and insistent, but Lily knew these streets. She'd walked them alone for years, memorizing every shortcut. She led Tom around a corner, past a flickering pawnshop sign, weaving through the maze until the voices faded into the city's hum. They ducked into a shadowed doorway, rain dripping from the overhang. Lily pressed herself against the wall, catching her breath, her jacket clinging to her skin. Tom stood beside her, chest heaving, his eyes scanning the alley for any sign of pursuit. The drizzle softened, leaving only the distant hum of traffic. "Who are you?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling but firm. Tom met her gaze, something guarded flickering in his expression. "Just Tom," he said, but the hesitation in his voice hinted at a story he wasn't ready to tell. "You shouldn't have done that. They're dangerous." Lily's jaw tightened, her stubborn streak flaring. "Look like you needed help. I'm not sorry." The rain fell in a gentle curtain around them, blurring the city's edges. Lily felt her heart steady, her fear giving way to a quiet resolve. She didn't know what she'd stumbled into, but she wasn't turning back now. The alley was a tunnel of shadows, its brick walls slick with rain. Lily Morgan's sneakers slapped against the uneven pavement as she pulled Tom deeper into the maze of Chicago's back streets. His arm was tense under her grip, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Behind them, the shouts of the suited men echoed, their voices sharp and commanding, but growing fainter with each turn. Lily's heart pounded, a mix of adrenaline and confusion. The name Thomas Hargrove rang in her ears, shouted by those men from the black SUV, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the next step, the next corner. The drizzle had thickened into a steady rain, soaking her jacket and plastering her dark hair to her face. She yanked Tom around a corner, past overflowing trash bins and a flickering neon sign for a closed pawn shop. Her mind raced, piecing together the shortcuts she'd learned from years of navigating these streets on foot. "This way," she whispered, spotting a boarded-up storage shed tucked behind a deli. The shed's door hung loose on rusted hinges, just enough for them to slip through. She pushed Tom inside first, then followed, easing the door shut with a soft creak. The air inside was heavy with the smell of damp wood and motor oil, and the only light came from a crack in the roof, where rain dripped in steady plinks. Lily pressed her back against the wall, listening for footsteps outside. The men's voices had faded, replaced by the hum of distant traffic and the patter of rain. She let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as the adrenaline ebbed. Tom crouched across from her, his coat drenched, his face half hidden in the dim light. He clutched his knees, as if bracing for another sprint. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. "Who were those guys?" Lily asked, her voice low but insistent. Her brown eyes searched his face, looking for answers in the lines of exhaustion etched there. Tom's gaze flicked to the door, then back to her. "People I owe," he said, his voice rough but careful, like he was measuring each word. "You shouldn't have helped me. This isn't your fight." Lily frowned, brushing wet hair from her eyes. "They were chasing you like you're some kind of criminal. I wasn't going to stand there and watch." She paused, studying him. His clothes were ragged, but there was a quiet dignity in the way he held himself, something that didn't fit the image of a man living on the streets. "What did you do to make them so mad?" He didn't answer right away. His hand moved to his beard, fingers lingering on a scar along his jaw. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Bad choices, bad debts. They don't let go easy." Lily wanted to press him, to ask about the name Thomas Hargrove, but the weariness in his voice stopped her. She reached into her bag, pulling out a granola bar she'd forgotten about. It was slightly crushed, but she broke it in half and offered him a piece. "Here," she said. "You look like you need it more than I do." Tom hesitated, then took the bar with a nod. "Thanks," he murmured, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a small warmth through Lily, cutting through the shed's chill. She looked away, chewing her half of the granola to steady herself. "I'm Lily, by the way," she said, breaking the silence. "Since we're hiding in a shed together, figured you should know my name." A faint smile tugged at his lips, the first she'd seen. "Tom," he said simply. He didn't offer more, and she didn't push. The smile stayed with her, a small light in the dark. They sat for a while, listening to the rain and the occasional siren in the distance. Lily thought of her mother, who'd always told her to trust her instincts. Helping Tom felt right, even if she didn't understand why. She couldn't let him go back to the streets, not with those men after him. The storage room at Brew and Bean came to mind, a cramped space with a cot and a heater, better than a dumpster in the rain. "You can't stay out here tonight," she said, her voice firm. "I work at the coffee shop down the street. There's a back room you can crash in just for tonight. Help me clean up after closing and we'll call it even." Tom's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and wariness. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You don't know me." Lily shrugged, a half smile playing on her lips. "Maybe I'm just bad at walking away from trouble." He studied her for a long moment, searching for a catch. Then he nodded. "Okay, just tonight." They waited until the rain eased to a drizzle, then slipped out of the shed. The streets were quiet, no sign of the SUV or its men. Lily led Tom back to Brew and Bean, unlocking the side door with her key. The shop was dark, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee and day-old pastries. She showed him to the storage room, a small space with a folding cot, stacked boxes, and a humming electric heater. "It's not a hotel," she said, flipping on the light, "but it's dry." Tom stepped inside, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's more than I've had in a while," he said, his voice soft. He set his damp coat on a chair, revealing a worn sweater underneath. Lily noticed a small tattoo on his wrist, a compass with a broken needle, but she didn't ask about it. "Get some rest," she said. "I'll be back in the morning to open. Don't break anything." He chuckled, a low, warm sound that caught her off guard. "I'll try not to." Lily locked the door behind her and stepped into the night, the rain now a faint mist. Her apartment was a 20-minute walk, but she barely noticed the cold. Her mind was on Tom, his guarded smile, and the name Thomas Hargrove. She didn't know what she'd gotten herself into, but a quiet resolve settled in her chest. Whatever came next, she was in it now. Chicago woke to a gray dawn, the sky heavy with the threat of more rain. Lily Morgan arrived at Brew and Bean just before 6, her sneakers squeaking on the wet sidewalk. The coffee shop was dark, its neon sign unlit, but a faint glow from the back room told her Tom was awake. She unlocked the side door, her stomach fluttering with curiosity and caution. The night in the alley, the chase from the black SUV, and the name Thomas Hargrove still echoed in her mind. She didn't know who Tom was, but she'd chosen to trust her instincts, and they hadn't steered her wrong yet. The shop smelled of roasted beans and stale milk as Lily flipped on the lights, the fluorescent bulbs humming to life. She found Tom in the storage room, folding the thin blanket on the cot. His damp coat hung over a chair, and his beard looked tidier, as if he'd used the corner sink to clean up. He glanced up as she entered, his green eyes guarded, but softer than the night before. The sight of him, standing in the cramped room he'd organized, felt strangely comforting, like he'd carved out a small place here. "You're up early," Lily said, leaning against the doorframe. Her tone was light, trying to bridge the gap left by last night's chaos. "Couldn't sleep," Tom replied, his voice low and gravelly. He gestured to the room, now neater than she'd ever seen it. Boxes were stacked, the floor swept, the heater's cord coiled tightly. "Figured I'd make myself useful." Lily raised an eyebrow, a half smile forming. "You didn't have to do all that." "I said clean up, not turn this into a showroom." Tom shrugged, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Keeps my hands busy." She studied him, noting the straightness of his posture despite the worn sweater and scuffed boots. He didn't seem broken, just burdened, carrying something heavy he hadn't shared. The name Thomas Hargrove tugged at her thoughts, but she pushed it down. She wanted to know him, not the shadow of whoever those men were chasing. She tossed him a rag from the shelf. "If you're so eager, help me open. Tables need wiping, and the espresso machine's a beast." Tom caught the rag and nodded. "Deal." They worked in a comfortable silence, the kind that felt natural. Lily set up the coffee station, grinding beans and checking the pastry case, while Tom wiped down tables and swept the floor. The shop's old radio crackled to life with a jazz tune, its saxophone notes drifting through the quiet. Lily caught Tom pausing, his rag still on a table, his head tilted as if the music stirred something deep. She didn't comment, but she tucked the moment away, another glimpse into the man she'd pulled from the rain. As the first customers arrived, retirees and early commuters, Lily worked the counter, her smile warm and practiced. Tom stayed in the background, refilling napkin dispensers and clearing trays. He moved with a quiet efficiency, blending into the shop's rhythm, but Lily noticed how he avoided eye contact with customers, his shoulders tensing whenever the door chimed. She wondered if he was still watching for the men in suits, if the SUV's shadow loomed in his mind as it did in hers. Around 9, the morning rush slowed, and Lily poured 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for Tom. She'd burned the batch, the brew bitter and sharp, but she didn't mind. She found him in the back room, sitting on the cot, staring at his hands. The compass tattoo on his wrist peeked out, its broken needle stark against his skin. "Here," she said, handing him the cup. It's awful, but it's hot. Tom took it, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Thanks, he said, sniffing the coffee with a wry smile. Smells like a bad decision. Lily laughed, the sound easing the small room's tension. She sat on a crate across from him, cradling her cup. My mom used to say bad coffee builds character, she said, her voice softening. She'd make the worst pot every Sunday, then make us drink it while she sang off-key to the radio. Drove me crazy, but I miss it now. Tom's smile faded, but his eyes stayed on her, listening. Sounds like she was special, he said, his voice gentle. She was, Lily said, her throat tightening. She hadn't planned to talk about her mom, but the words came easily. She passed 3 years ago. Cancer. Left me with medical bills in her old recipe book. I still can't get her pancakes right. Tom nodded, his expression soft but unreadable. I'm sorry, he said, and she felt the sincerity in his words. He sipped the coffee, wincing at the taste, and Lily chuckled, the moment lightening. Your turn, she said, leaning forward, her eyes teasing but curious. Got a story? Or do you just haunt sheds and drink bad coffee? Tom's jaw tightened, and she thought he'd close off. But he leaned back, hands wrapped around the cup. Not much to tell, he said. Grew up in a house where music wasn't a priority. Sneaked out to listen anyway. Got in trouble for it. He paused, his voice quieter. Guess I'm still in trouble. Lily wanted more, but she felt the wall he'd raised. She nodded, letting it go. Well, you're welcome to haunt this place for now. Just don't break anything. He chuckled, a low rumble that warmed the air. I'll try. The day stretched on, and Tom became a quiet fixture in the shop. Lily convinced her boss, Carla, a gruff woman with a soft spot, to let him stay, saying he was a friend helping out. Carla grumbled but agreed, as long as he didn't scare customers. Tom proved his worth, fixing a wobbly table and unclogging the sink without being asked. Lily watched him, intrigued by the contrast between his rough exterior and his careful precision, like he'd once handled bigger challenges than a leaky pipe. That evening, as they closed, Lily noticed Tom shivering in his thin sweater. She remembered an old jacket of hers left in the shop's lost and found. It was faded green, too big for her but warm. She grabbed it and tossed it to him. Put this on, she said, turning away to hide her flush. Can't have you freezing on my watch. Tom caught the jacket, his brow furrowing. You sure? It's just sitting there, she said, fussing with the cash register. Payment for this sink. He slipped it on, the sleeves a bit short, but the fit close enough. Thanks, Lily, he said, his voice softer. The sight of him in her jacket stirred a warmth in her chest, unexpected and strong. As they locked up, a regular Joe, a retired bus driver, pulled Lily aside. That guy, he said, nodding at Tom, who was sweeping the sidewalk. Something's off about him. Be careful, kid. Lily bristled, her loyalty to Tom surprising her. He's fine, Joe, she said, sharper than intended. Just needs a break, like anyone. Joe shrugged and walked off. Lily watched Tom, his broom moving steadily, and wondered if Joe was right. She'd given him a place to sleep, but she didn't know his story. The name Thomas Hargrove and the SUV flashed in her mind, but her gut said to trust him. Before leaving, Lily turned on the radio, a jazz station playing a trumpet solo, bright and aching. Tom paused, his broom still, his eyes distant. You like this stuff? She asked, curious. It's the only thing that ever made sense, he said, almost to himself. He looked at her, a real smile breaking through, and Lily's heart skipped. She didn't know why, but she wanted to see that smile again. Walking home, the city lights blurred in the mist, Lily felt a quiet hope. The chase, the fear, hadn't faded, but Tom's presence made it feel lighter, like she wasn't carrying it alone. A week had passed since Lily Morgan pulled Tom from the rain-soaked alley, away from the men in the black SUV shouting, Thomas Hargrove. The memory of that night lingered, a quiet tension that made her glance at Brew and Bean's door during slow hours, but no one had come for him. Tom had become a steady part of the coffee shop, his presence as familiar as the hum of the espresso machine. Chicago's autumn deepened, leaves piling on the streets, the air sharp with a chill that made the shop's warmth a haven. Lily found herself looking forward to seeing him, his green eyes and rare smiles brightening her days. One Saturday morning, Lily arrived at the shop, her breath visible in the dawn's chill. The neon sign was dark, but she heard the radio's faint jazz from the back room. Tom was there, sweeping the floor, wearing the faded green jacket she'd given him. Its sleeves were short, but it kept him warm, and the sight of him in it made her smile. He looked up as she entered, his broom pausing. "Morning," Lily said, shaking off her damp scarf. The drizzle outside clung to her dark hair. "You ever take a day off, or is sweeping your new life's work?" Tom's lips twitched, a half-smile forming. "Keeps me out of trouble," he said, his voice low and warm. Lily chuckled, starting the coffee station. "Doubt that." She caught him humming to the jazz, a soft melody that seemed to carry him elsewhere. She didn't ask where, but she wondered, storing the moment with the others she'd collected, his love for music, his guarded words. The morning passed in a flurry of customers, steaming mugs and clinking coins. Tom stayed in the background, refilling sugar dispensers and clearing tables, his quiet efficiency a contrast to his rough appearance. Lily noticed how he listened when she laughed with regulars, his eyes flickering with interest. She also saw him tense when a man in a suit entered, only relaxing when it was just a lawyer grabbing a latte. Joe's warning about Tom being off echoed faintly, but she trusted the man who fixed the shop sink, not the one those men had chased. By noon, the rush eased, and Lily decided they needed a break. "Come on," she said, grabbing her jacket. "We're getting out of here. I'm not spending my whole day inhaling coffee fumes." Tom hesitated, his gaze flicking to the door. "You sure it's okay?" "Carla's buried in paperwork," Lily said, nodding toward the office. "We've got an hour. You need fresh air." She saw his unease but didn't back down. "Trust me," he relented with a small smile. All right, they walked to Lincoln Park, a short distance from the shop, where autumn leaves blanketed the grass in gold and crimson. The park buzzed with joggers, dog walkers, and kids chasing pigeons. Lily led Tom to a bench by a pond, its water reflecting the cloudy sky. She used her tips to buy a hot dog from a vendor, splitting it with Tom. They ate in silence, the smoky flavor a small treat. A pigeon waddled over, eyeing their crumbs, and Lily tossed it a piece, laughing as it strutted off. "This place," she said, leaning back. "It's where I come to clear my head. My mom used to bring me here. We'd feed the ducks and pretend we were explorers." Tom nodded, his eyes on the pond. "Sounds like a good memory, having someone to share it with." Lily sensed an opening. "What about you? Got a place like that? Somewhere you went as a kid?" He was quiet, his fingers tracing the bench's edge. "There was a jazz club," he said at last, his voice soft. "Not for kids, but I'd sneak in through the back, listen to the saxophone in the dark. My dad hated it, said it was pointless." A bitter edge crept in. He had other plans for me. Lily waited, hoping for more, but he stopped, his gaze distant. "Well, you're here now," she said gently. "And I say jazz is worth sneaking out for." He looked at her, a real smile breaking through, and her heart lifted. "You're not wrong," he said, his voice warm. Back at the shop, the day stretched into evening. Lily showed Tom how to foam milk for cappuccinos, laughing when he overdid it, sending froth onto the counter. "You're a disaster," she teased, handing him a rag. He grinned, wiping it up, their hands brushing briefly. Lily's cheeks warmed, and she turned away, focusing on the next order. At night, a sudden rainstorm hit, turning the streets into rivers. Lily grabbed an umbrella from the lost and found, barely big enough for one. "Come on," she said, holding it up. "We're sharing." They stepped outside, huddling under the umbrella, their shoulders touching as they walked. The rain drummed above, drowning out the city. A gust flipped the umbrella inside out, leaving them drenched. Lily laughed, her hair sticking to her face, and Tom joined in, his laughter deep and free. They stood under a streetlight, soaked and shivering, their eyes meeting in the glow. The moment felt alive, electric. "You guess we're even," Tom said, teasing. "You saved me from a chase, I saved you from a bad umbrella," Lily grinned, pushing wet hair from her eyes. "Not even close." They reached the shop's side door, where Tom slept, and lingered under the awning. Lily wanted to ask about the jazz club, his dad, but the moment felt too delicate. "See you tomorrow," she said, her voice soft. "Tomorrow," he echoed, his smile lingering. The next evening, Lily found an old guitar in the storage room, left by a former employee. She dusted it off and handed it to Tom after closing. "You said you liked music," she said, her tone casual but hopeful. "Play something." Tom hesitated, his fingers tracing the strings. Then he sat on the cot, tuning the guitar with an ease that surprised her. He played a slow, mournful melody, the notes filling the room with an ache that tightened Lily's chest. His eyes closed, his face lost in the music, and she saw a man carrying a pain she didn't yet understand. When he finished, the silence was heavy. "That was beautiful," Lily said, her voice a whisper. "Where'd you learn that?" Tom set the guitar down, his expression guarded. "Long time ago," he said, "before things got messy." Lily nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "You should play more," she said. "It suits you." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, and she thought he might say more, but he only nodded. "Maybe." Walking home, the city lights blurred in the rain. Lily's mind lingered on Tom's music, his smile, the way he made the shop feel like home. The chase and fear from that first night hadn't faded, but with Tom beside her, she felt ready for whatever came next. The air in Bruin Bean carried the familiar scent of roasted coffee and autumn dampness, but a new tension hung between Lily Morgan and Tom as the second week of their unlikely friendship began. Chicago's streets outside were a mosaic of wet leaves and gray skies, the city settling into the rhythm of late October. Lily had grown used to Tom's presence, his quiet efficiency in the coffee shop, his rare smiles that lit up the dim storage room. The memory of the black SUV and the men shouting "Thomas Hargrove" had faded slightly, overshadowed by shared hot dogs in Lincoln Park and the mournful notes of Tom's guitar. But the name Hargrove and the mystery it carried still lingered in Lily's mind, a question she hadn't dared to ask. It was a Tuesday morning, slow and foggy, when everything changed. Lily arrived at the shop earlier than usual, her sneakers leaving wet prints on the floor. The neon sign was off, and the only sound was the faint hum of the heater in the back room. Tom was there, as always, stacking boxes with a precision that made the cluttered space look almost orderly. He wore the green jacket she'd given him, its faded fabric now as much a part of him as his guarded green eyes. He glanced up as she entered, offering a small nod, but Lily's attention was elsewhere. She'd been tasked with sorting through a pile of old newspapers for recycling, a chore Carla, the shop's gruff owner, had been nagging her about for weeks. The papers were stacked in a corner of the storage room, yellowed and curling at the edges. Lily knelt beside them, sifting through headlines about local elections and sports scores, her hands moving automatically. Tom worked nearby, rearranging coffee filters, the soft clink of his movements blending with the jazz drifting from the radio. Then she saw it. Buried beneath a stack of Tribune issues was a single page from a business magazine, its date over a year old. The headlines screamed in bold letters, "Tech Tycoon Thomas Hargrove Vanishes After Fraud Scandal." Below it was a photograph of a clean-shaven man in a tailored suit, his posture confident, his eyes sharp and green. Lily's breath caught. The man in the photo was unmistakably Tom. The beard was gone, the suit replaced by a worn sweater, but those eyes, the scar along his jaw, the compass tattoo peeking from his sleeve, they were his. Her hands shook as she lifted the page, the paper crinkling in the quiet. The article detailed the collapse of Nextech, a Chicago-based tech company, and accusations of embezzlement against its CEO, Thomas Hargrove. Words like betrayal and disappearance jumped out, painting a picture of a man who'd fled in disgrace. Lily's mind raced back to the SUV, the men in suits, the name they'd shouted. Thomas Hargrove. Art's not just Tom. She stood, the newspaper clutched in her hand, and turned to him. Tom froze, his eyes locking onto the page. For a moment, neither spoke, the jazz on the radio filling the silence with a mournful saxophone. "What is this?" Lily asked, her voice steady but edged with hurt. She held up the article, the photo facing him. "Who are you, Tom?" Tom's face paled, his shoulders slumping as if the weight he'd carried had finally crushed him. He set down the coffee filters, his hands trembling slightly. "Lily," he said, his voice low and raw, "I didn't want you to find out like this." "Find out what?" she pressed, stepping closer. Her heart pounded, a mix of anger and fear. "That you're some kind of fugitive? That you've been lying to me?" The words stung as they left her, but she couldn't stop. She'd trusted him, given him a place to sleep, shared pieces of her life, and now this. Tom ran a hand through his beard, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I'm not a fugitive," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not who you think I am." He looked up, meeting her gaze, and the pain in his eyes made her pause. "My name is Thomas Hargrove. I was the CEO of Nextech. Built it from nothing, turned it into something big. But my partner, he betrayed me, framed me for stealing millions. I didn't do it, Lily, I swear. But no one believed me. Not the board, not my family, not even my own father." Lily's grip on the newspaper tightened, the words blurring as she listened. "So you ran?" she asked, her voice softer now, but still sharp. "You just disappeared?" He nodded, his jaw tight. "I couldn't face it. The accusations, the headlines, the way everyone looked at me like I was a thief. I lost everything, my company, my name, my home. So I left, thought I could start over, be someone else. Just Tom." He gestured to himself, his worn sweater, the jacket she'd given him. "This is all I've got left." Lily's throat tightened. She wanted to be angry, to yell at him for hiding the truth, but the rawness in his voice, the way his hands clenched as he spoke, stopped her. She thought of the guitar, the way he'd played with such sorrow, the jazz that seemed to anchor him. Those weren't lies, but the hurt of his secrecy lingered. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I'd let you stay here, Tom. I trusted you." He flinched, as if her words were a physical blow. "I wanted to," he said. "Every time you smiled, every time you shared your coffee or your stories, I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me as that guy in the article. A failure, a fraud. Not the person I am with you." Lily looked at the newspaper, then back at him. The man in the photo was polished, powerful, but the man before her was real, flawed, and hurting. She thought of her mother, who taught her to see people for who they were, not what the world said about them. But trust, once shaken, wasn't easy to rebuild. "I don't care about the article," she said finally, her voice firm. "I care that you didn't trust me enough to be honest. I deserve better than that." Tom nodded, his eyes glistening. "You do," he said, "and I'm sorry. If you want me to go, I'll go. I owe you that much." Lily's chest ached at the thought of him leaving, of the shop without his quiet presence, his music, his rare laughter. She didn't know if she could trust him fully, not yet, but she knew she didn't want him to disappear into the city's shadows. "Don't go," she said, her voice quieter now. "But no more secrets, Tom. Promise me." He met her gaze, his expression raw and open. "I promise," he said, and she felt the weight of his words, heavy with sincerity. She folded the newspaper and set it on a box, her hands still trembling. The jazz on the radio shifted to a slower tune, its notes wrapping around them like a fragile truce. "Okay," she said, exhaling. "We open in 20 minutes. Help me set up." And don't mess up the espresso machine. Tom's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through the tension. Yes, ma'am, he said, his voice soft but steadier. They moved to the front of the shop, Lily grinding beans, Tom wiping down the counter. The silence between them was different now. Not as easy as before, but not broken either. Lily glanced at him, his head bowed as he worked, and felt a mix of emotions. Hurt, hope, and something deeper she couldn't name. The name Thomas Hargrove was no longer just a shout in the night. It was a piece of Tom's story, one he'd finally shared. She didn't know what it meant for them, but she knew she wasn't ready to let him go. As the first customers arrived, their voices filling the shop, Lily poured 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for Tom. She handed him his, their fingers brushing, and met his eyes. No more surprises, she said, half teasing, half serious. He nodded, his smile small but real. No more surprises. Outside, the rain began again, a soft patter against the shop's windows, but inside, Lily felt a spark of resolve. Whatever Tom's past held, they'd face it together, one coffee at a time. The air in Brew and Bean felt heavier after Lily Morgan uncovered Tom's secret, the weight of his past as Thomas Hargrove, former CEO of Nextech, settling between them like dust. Chicago's late October days grew colder, the city wrapped in fog and the sharp scent of wet leaves. The coffee shop remained a haven, its warm lights and jazz radio a contrast to the gray streets outside, but Lily couldn't shake the unease that had crept in since finding the newspaper article. Tom's promise of no more secrets had steadied her, and their routine, wiping tables, pouring coffee, sharing quiet smiles, held them together. Yet the name Hargrove, and the men who'd chased him that first night loomed in her mind, a storm waiting to break. It was a Thursday evening, the shop nearly empty, when the storm arrived. Lily was behind the counter, cleaning the espresso machine, its familiar hiss a comforting rhythm. Tom was in the back, restocking coffee filters, his green jacket hanging on a hook. The radio played a soft trumpet solo, its notes weaving through the quiet. Only one customer remained, an older woman reading a novel in the corner, her tea long gone cold. Lily glanced at the clock, 10 minutes until closing, and felt a flicker of relief. The day had been long, and she looked forward to locking up, maybe sharing a burnt coffee with Tom before heading home. The door chimed, sharp and sudden, shattering the calm. Lily looked up, expecting a late commuter, but her stomach dropped. 3 men in dark suits stepped inside, their faces hard, their movements deliberate. The leader, tall with a jaw like carved stone, scanned the shop, his eyes landing on the door to the storage room. Lily's pulse quickened, the memory of the black SUV from that first night flooding back. These men weren't here for coffee. "Where is he?" the leader barked, his voice low but commanding. He stepped toward the counter, his suit jacket shifting to reveal a glimpse of a holstered gun. The other 2 flanked him, one blocking the entrance, the other moving toward the back. Lily's hands froze on the rag she was holding, her heart racing. "Who?" she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She stepped slightly to the side, positioning herself between the men and the storage room door. "Don't play dumb," the leader said, his eyes narrowing. "Thomas Hargrove, we know he's here." He leaned forward, his hands gripping the counter, his voice dropping to a growl. "Hand him over, and you won't get hurt." Lily's mind raced. She thought of Tom, stacking filters in the back, unaware of the danger. She thought of the article, the accusations of fraud, the life he'd fled. She didn't know the full story, but she knew Tom, the man who played guitar with aching sorrow, who wore her jacket like a shield. She wouldn't let these men take him without a fight. "He's not here," she said, meeting the leader's gaze. Her voice trembled slightly, but she held her ground. "You've got the wrong place." The leader's lips curled into a sneer. "You're lying." He nodded to the man near the back door, who moved to open it. Lily's heart lurched. She couldn't let them reach Tom. "Wait!" she shouted, loud enough to make the older woman look up from her book. "You can't just barge in here. This is private property. I'll call the police." She reached for her phone on the counter, her fingers shaking but deliberate. The leader grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron. "Don't," he said, his voice cold. You don't want to make this messy. Before Lily could respond, the storage room door swung open. Tom stepped out, his face pale but resolute. Let her go, he said, his voice low and firm. He stood in the doorway, his worn sweater and scuffed boots a stark contrast to the suited men. But his eyes burned with a defiance Lily hadn't seen before. The leader released Lily's wrist, turning to Tom with a predatory smile. Hargrove, he said, you've been a hard man to find. Tom's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. What do you want? He asked, his voice steady despite the tension in his shoulders. You know what, the leader said. Next text bleeding out. Your signature on a few papers and we can all walk away. You owe us that much. I owe you nothing, Tom said, his voice sharp. I'm done with that life. The leader's smile vanished. He nodded to the other two men who moved toward Tom. Lily acted on instinct, stepping between them. Leave him alone, she shouted, her voice echoing in the shop. The older woman gasped, clutching her book, but Lily didn't care. He said he's done. Get out. The leader's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, the man by the entrance grabbed Tom's arm, twisting it behind his back. Tom grunted, struggling, but the second man joined in, pinning him against the wall. Lily lunged forward, grabbing a coffee pot and swinging it at the nearest man. It connected with his shoulder, hot coffee splashing across his suit. He cursed, loosening his grip on Tom, but the leader seized Lily, shoving her against the counter. Enough, he roared. Hargrove, you're coming with us, now. Tom's eyes met Lily's, a mix of fear and determination. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. Before she could respond, the men dragged him toward the door, his boots scraping the floor. Lily struggled against the leader's grip, shouting, Tom! But he was too strong. The door slammed shut and the black SUV outside roared to life, its headlights cutting through the fog. The tires screeched as it sped away, taking Tom with it. Lily stumbled free as the leader released her, his parting words cold. Stay out of this, or you'll regret it. He followed his men, leaving the shop in silence. The older woman stared, wide-eyed, her book forgotten. Lily's knees buckled and she gripped the counter, her breath ragged. The jazz on the radio played on, its notes now jarring against the emptiness. She sank to the floor, her mind racing. Tom was gone, taken by the men who'd haunted him since that first night. She thought of his promise, no more secrets, and the pain in his eyes when he'd told her about Next Tech, about losing everything. She didn't know where they'd taken him or what they wanted, but she knew she couldn't let it end like this. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Kindness is what you give when it's hardest. She'd given Tom her last dollar, her trust, her time. She wasn't giving up now. Lily stood, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. She dialed her cousin Eddie, a junior reporter at a local news outlet. He'd always been nosy, good at digging up dirt. Eddie, she said when he answered, her voice urgent. I need your help. It's about someone named Thomas Hargrove. Find out where he might be, fast. Eddie hesitated, catching the strain in her voice. Lily, what's going on? No time to explain, she said. Just do it, please. She hung up, her eyes scanning the shop. The older woman approached, her voice trembling. Are you okay, dear? Should I call the police? Lily shook her head, forcing a smile. I'm fine, just a misunderstanding. You should go home. The woman nodded, gathering her things and leaving, casting worried glances back. Alone, Lily locked the door, the shop's warmth now stifling. She thought of Tom's guitar, still in the storage room, the jacket he'd left behind. She didn't know what Nextech wanted from him or why those men needed his signature, but she knew Tom didn't deserve to face it alone. Her cousin's call would take time, but she had a lead, the name Nextech and a memory of a hotel mentioned in the article, the Grand Meridian, a place tied to Chicago's elite. Lily grabbed her jacket, her resolve hardening. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the street slick and gleaming. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she was going to find Tom no matter what it took. The shop's radio played a final note, and she stepped into the night, ready to fight for the man she'd come to care for. The fog clung to Chicago's streets, wrapping the city in a damp gray shroud as Lily Morgan sped toward the Grand Meridian Hotel. Her cousin Eddie's call had come just after midnight, his voice tense with urgency. He'd traced Nectec's board to a late-night meeting at the Meridian, a sleek tower of glass and marble where Chicago's elite brokered deals. Thomas Hargrove's name came up in their filings. Eddie had said, "They're desperate to close some patent deal, and he's the key. Be careful, Lily." She'd barely thanked him before grabbing her jacket and borrowing her neighbor's beat-up sedan, its engine rattling as she navigated the city's wet streets. The Grand Meridian loomed ahead, its lights piercing the fog like a beacon. Lily's heart pounded, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She thought of Tom, dragged from Brew and Bean by those men in suits, his eyes full of apology and defiance. The memory of his guitar, his quiet laughter, and the promise of no more secrets fueled her resolve. She didn't know what Nextech wanted from him, or how she'd get him out, but she knew she couldn't let him face it alone. Her mother's words echoed, "Kindness is what you give when it's hardest," and Lily was ready to give everything. She parked a block away, the sedan's tires crunching on wet gravel. The hotel's entrance was a vision of wealth, doormen in crisp uniforms, chandeliers casting golden light through towering windows. Lily felt out of place in her damp jacket and worn sneakers, but she squared her shoulders and walked in, her breath steadying. The lobby was all marble and mirrors, the air scented with expensive cologne and polished wood. The receptionist glanced up, her smile polite but guarded. "Can I help you?" she asked. Lily's mind raced. She couldn't just ask for Tom or Next Step's board. "I'm here for the business meeting," she said, forcing confidence. "The Next Tech Group. I'm with Hargrove's team." The receptionist's eyes narrowed, but she checked her screen. "They're in the Meridian Suite, 15th floor," she said. "Elevators to your left. You'll need a keycard for access." Lily nodded, her stomach twisting. She had no keycard, no plan, but she thanked the woman and headed for the elevators. A security guard stood nearby, his gaze following her. She waited until he turned away, then slipped into an open elevator, her heart thudding as the doors closed. She pressed the button for the 15th floor, praying the keycard check was just a formality. The elevator hummed, each floor ticking by like a countdown. Lily's thoughts flickered to the coffee shop, to Tom's worn sweater, the way he'd looked at her when she'd asked for no more secrets. She didn't know what she'd find in that suite, but she knew Tom needed her, and that was enough. The doors opened to a hushed hallway, its carpet thick and walls lined with abstract art. At the end was a double door, the Meridian Suite, guarded by a single man in a suit, his posture rigid. Lily's breath caught. She couldn't talk her way past him. She spotted a service cart nearby left unattended, and an idea sparked. She grabbed a stack of folded towels, tucking them under her arm, and approached the guard, her head down. "Laundry delivery?" she said, her voice low, hoping he wouldn't look too closely. He barely glanced at her, waving her through. "Make it quick," he grunted, opening the door. Lily stepped into the suite, her pulse roaring in her ears. The room was vast, a conference table dominating the center, surrounded by a dozen men and women in suits. At the far end sat Tom, his hands clasped, his face pale but defiant. Papers were spread before him, and the man from the coffee shop, the leader with the stone jaw, stood over him, his voice sharp. "Sign it, Hargrove," he said. "You owe Nextech. This is your last chance." Tom's eyes flicked up, meeting the man's gaze. "I told you," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not signing. You framed me. You don't get to win." The leader slammed a fist on the table, making the papers jump. "You think you can walk away? We'll bury you." Lily's heart lurched. She dropped the towels behind a chair, stepping into the open before she could second-guess herself. "Stop," she shouted, her voice echoing in the room. Every head turned, eyes wide with surprise. Tom's face lit up, a mix of shock and relief. but the leader's expression darkened. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, striding toward her. Lily stood her ground, her hands trembling but her voice firm. "I'm someone who knows Tom doesn't owe you anything," she said. "He's not your pawn. He's a person with a life and he deserves to choose it." She looked at Tom, her eyes locking onto his. "You don't have to do this," the leader laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You're out of your depth, kid. This is business, not a fairy tale." Tom stood, his chair scraping the floor. "She's right," he said, his voice rising. "I'm done letting you control me. You took my company, my name, everything. But you don't get my future." He grabbed the papers, tearing them in half, the pieces fluttering to the floor like ash. The room erupted in shouts, board members leaping to their feet. The leader lunged for Tom, but Lily stepped between them, shoving a chair into his path. "Back off!" she yelled, her voice raw. The guard from the hallway burst in, drawn by the noise, but Tom was already moving, grabbing Lily's hand. "Run," he said, his voice urgent but calm. They bolted for the door, the guard's shouts following. Lily's sneakers pounded the carpet, Tom's hand warm and steady in hers. They reached the elevator, the doors sliding open just as the guard rounded the corner. They dove inside, Tom jabbing the lobby button. The doors closed, muffling the chaos behind them. The elevator hummed, the air thick with their ragged breaths. Lily looked at Tom, his face flushed, his eyes bright with something new. Freedom, maybe, or hope. "You okay?" she asked, her voice shaky. He nodded, squeezing her hand. "Thanks to you," he said, his voice soft but fierce. "I didn't think anyone would come for me." Lily's throat tightened. "I wasn't letting them take you," she said, her words a promise. The elevator opened to the lobby, and they ran, ignoring the receptionist's startled cry. Outside, the fog had thickened, the city a blur of lights and shadows. They sprinted down the street, the sedan still parked where Lily had left it. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking, but Tom steadied her, his touch grounding. They climbed in, the engine sputtering to life, and Lily floored the gas, weaving through the empty streets. They didn't stop until they reached a quiet park, the same one where they'd shared a hot dog days before. The fog hung low, the pond a mirror of gray. Lily cut the engine, her breath slowing. Tom leaned back, his hand still holding hers, the warmth of it anchoring them both. "They'll come after you again," Lily said, her voice quiet but certain. "Won't they?" Tom nodded, his jaw tight. "Maybe. But I'm not running anymore. Not after this." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "You didn't have to do that, Lily. You could have gotten hurt." She shook her head, a small smile breaking through. "You're worth it," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Tom's expression softened, a warmth in his eyes that made her heart skip. They sat in silence, the fog wrapping them in a world of their own. The rain began again, a soft patter on the car's roof. But Lily didn't care. They were here, together, and for now that was enough. She started the car, the headlights cutting through the fog. "Let's get out of here," she said, her voice steady. "We'll figure out what's next." Tom nodded, his hand still in hers. As they drove into the night, the city's lights blurred behind them. Lily felt a spark of hope. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it side by side, their bond forged in coffee, music, and a courage neither had known they possessed. 2 years had passed since the foggy night when Lily Morgan and Tom escaped the Grand Meridian, their hands clasped as they fled Nextech's grasp. Chicago had changed with the seasons, its streets now dusted with early November frost, but the warmth of brew and bean remained a constant. Lily and Tom had built a new life, not in the shadow of his past as Thomas Hargrove, but in the quiet moments they'd carved together. The coffee shop was no longer their only anchor. They'd opened a community kitchen in a modest storefront nearby, a place where anyone could walk in for a hot meal, no questions asked. The kitchen was Lily's dream come true, its walls lined with children's drawings, its tables mismatched but always full. Tom was her partner in every sense, his steady presence a reminder of the night she'd given him her last dollar. Their days were simple but full, filled with the clatter of pots, the laughter of volunteers, and the soft strum of Tom's guitar during evening gatherings. A whistleblower had cleared Tom's name months after their escape, exposing his former partner's fraud at Nextech. The news made headlines, but Tom chose not to reclaim his old life. He sold his remaining shares, donating most to the kitchen, keeping only enough for a small apartment he and Lily shared, a cozy space above a bookstore, cluttered with records and her mother's recipe books. The jazz that had once been his refuge now filled their home, a soundtrack to their shared dreams. One crisp evening, Lily walked home from the kitchen, her scarf tucked tight against the chill. The city sparkled under streetlights, the frost glinting like stars on the pavement. She was tired, her hands still smelling of the soup she'd served, but her heart was light. The kitchen had fed 60 people that day, and Tom had played a new song for the kids, his smile as bright as the notes. She climbed the stairs to their apartment, expecting to find him there, maybe brewing tea or tuning his guitar. As she reached the landing, headlights flashed through the building's front window, cutting through the dusk. A black SUV sat parked on the street below, its sleek lines unmistakable. Lily's breath caught, her mind flashing to that first night, the men in suits, the chase through the alleys. She froze, her hand on the doorknob, until the driver's door opened. Tom stepped out, his silhouette tall and familiar, no longer the ragged man she'd met, but still wearing the faded green jacket she'd given him. His beard was trimmed, his hair neat, but his eyes held the same quiet warmth she'd come to love. Lily opened the door and stepped onto the stoop, her heart racing with curiosity and a flicker of nerves. "Tom?" she called, her voice soft in the cold air. "What's with the car?" He smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that made her stomach flutter. "Borrowed it," he said, walking toward her, his boots crunching on the frosty sidewalk. In his hand was a single red rose, its petals vibrant against the gray evening. Thought it'd make tonight special. Lily's brow furrowed, but she couldn't hide her smile. "Special how?" she asked, stepping closer. The SUV's headlights cast a soft glow, and a light snow began to fall, dusting her scarf. Tom stopped in front of her, his breath visible in the chill. He set the rose on the stoop's railing, then took her hands, his fingers warm despite the cold. "Lily," he said, his voice low and steady, 2 years ago, you gave me your last dollar when I was nothing but a stranger in an alley. You gave me a place to sleep, a reason to keep going. You saw me, not the mess I'd become, and you fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." Lily's throat tightened, her eyes stinging as she listened. She thought of the coffee shop, the park, the night she'd crashed into the Meridian suite to save him. "You'd have done the same," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, his grip tightening. "Maybe. But you did it first. You showed me what kindness looks like, what home feels like. I was lost, Lily, but you found me." He paused, his eyes searching hers, then dropped to one knee, the snow gathering around him. From his pocket he pulled a simple silver ring, its band catching the SUV's light. "I don't have much, not the way I used to. But I have you, and that's everything. Will you marry me?" Lily's breath caught, tears spilling down her cheeks. The world narrowed to Tom kneeling before her, his face open and certain. She thought of their journey, the jazz, the rain, the trust they'd rebuilt. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. She pulled him up, wrapping her arms around him, their laughter mingling in the snowy air. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed, the SUV's headlights framing them like a quiet prom. Tom pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "The car was a nod to that first night," he said, chuckling. "Figured I'd turn a bad memory into a good one." Lily laughed, swatting his arm. "You scared me half to death," she said, but her smile was wide. "It's perfect." They stood there, snow dusting their shoulders, until the cold drove them inside. Their apartment was warm, the radio playing a soft jazz tune. Over tea, Tom told her he'd rented the SUV from a friend, a playful gesture to mark the moment they'd started, when a black car meant danger, not love. A week later, an unexpected visitor arrived at the community kitchen. Lily was serving soup when a man in a wool coat stepped inside, his hair gray, his face lined with regret. Tom froze, his ladle hovering over a pot. "Dad," he said, his voice tight. Robert Hargrove approached, clutching a small photo, a faded image of Tom as a boy playing a piano. "I saw the news," he said, his voice rough. "About Nextech, about you being cleared. I was wrong, son. I thought you'd failed, but you've built something better here." He glanced at Lily, his eyes softening. "You found someone who sees you the way I should have." Lily watched Tom, her heart aching for him. He set the ladle down, his hands trembling. "You didn't believe me," he said, the hurt raw. "You let me go." Robert nodded, his eyes glistening. "I know, and I'll carry that forever. But I'm here now, if you'll let me." Tom looked at Lily, her steady gaze grounding him. He stepped forward, taking the photo, then pulled his father into a hesitant embrace. "Okay," he said, his voice thick. "We start slow." Lily joined them, her hand slipping into Tom's. "Stay for dinner?" she said to Robert, her smile warm. "We've got plenty." They sat together, sharing soup and stories, the kitchen alive with laughter and clinking spoons. Robert listened as Tom talked about the kids they taught, the songs he played, and Lily's dream to expand the kitchen. For the first time, he saw his son, not the CEO he'd wanted, but the man he'd become. As the evening ended, Lily and Tom stood outside the kitchen, watching snow fall on the city. The streets were quiet, the frost sparkling under streetlights. They held hands, the silver ring cool against Lily's finger. The past, with its SUVs and scandals, was behind them, replaced by a future they'd built together. One meal, one song, one act of kindness at a time. Lily leaned into Tom, her heart full, knowing they'd found a home in each other, no matter what the world threw their way. Lily Morgan and Tom's journey shows us that a single act of kindness can spark a love that changes everything. From a crumpled dollar in a Chicago alley to a silver ring under falling snow, their story is about seeing the heart of a person, not the shadows of their past. Lily's courage and Tom's choice to rebuild his life remind us that true freedom comes from living honestly with those who matter most. Their community kitchen, filled with laughter and shared meals, proves that happiness lies in the simplest moments, and their reconciliation with family shows that love can mend even the deepest wounds. If this story touched you, let it inspire you to offer kindness, no matter how small, because you never know where it might lead. Hit the subscribe button to join us for more stories of heart and hope. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that love and generosity always shine through. Leave a comment below. Tell us about a time you gave or received kindness that made a difference. We'll see you in the next tale, where every moment holds the power to rewrite a life.